On Tech News Today, Europe says America can't be trusted with the internet. Android apps may be coming to Windows, maybe. And enterprises embrace BYOI. Yeah, bring your own iPhone. All that and more coming up next.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
It's Wednesday, February 12th, 2014, and this is Tech News Today. Today's episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free 2-week trial and 10% off, go to squarespace.com and use the offer code TNT2. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgin. Jason Howell is off today. Tech News Today explores the most important stories of the day in conversation with the world's leading journalists. Our guests today include Matthew Ingram, a senior writer at GigaOM. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And also with us is Peter Kafka, a senior editor at Recode. Thanks for joining us today, Peter.
Hey, how are you?
Fantastic. Well, let's get right into the news. The European Commission wants control of the internet to be moved from the United States and redistributed globally. Among their stated reasons is, quote, loss of confidence, unquote, in the U.S. following the NSA surveillance revelations. Gentlemen, isn't the EU simply hijacking fear of the NSA to get something it's always wanted, which was more involvement in the control of the internet? I mean, what does the NSA have to do with functions like allocating IP addresses? What do you think, Peter?
I believe that's a fig leaf, like you said. If they want it, you just like lots of other governments have. My picture looks as bad as it does in my frame. Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah, you look great. Yeah,
I look fabulous. Look, you've heard the NSA stuff come up in all sorts of disputes between other countries in the U.S. So stands to reason you would use this in this argument as well. I don't think it has much bearing one way or the other.
You know, it's. I think what the EU really wants is more European involvement in all aspects of controlling and regulating the government. But they can't just say, we want more European control. So the way they say it is we want more international control. But international control means giving control, spreading around to China, Iran. You know, it starts to resemble the the UN, where they have this ridiculous state of affairs where for a while, for example, North Korea was in charge of sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Commission. Libya at some point under Gaddafi was part of human rights. I mean, do we really want China to be involved in controlling the internet?
I don't think we do, and I don't think anyone thinks that's going to happen. I think the journal article references the idea that there's sort of a non-starter proposal to sort of make this a UN-run thing. And so again, like in any negotiation, you offer something that you never expect to get, hoping to get something that's closer to the middle ground where what you might actually attain. So, you know, look, I mean, you're walking into the middle of a public negotiation. So I would sort of discredit a lot of what actually gets said and pay attention to what happens.
You know, I have to say, Mike, I think the EU has a point. I mean, sure, we can make fun of the UN and we can make fun of the ITU and how they want to impose all sorts of things on the internet. But in a way, you know, the fact that large proportions of what happens on the internet and how it functions are effectively controlled by the U.S. doesn't seem right. It was fine when the internet got started, and I can't remember his name was running the entire ICANN off an index card that he kept in his shirt pocket. But you know, it's a vast global network. It should be that other countries should be involved.
Yeah, ICANN being the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. You know, on the one hand, it's not right that this tiny little sort of group has so much control of the global internet, and it really is the world's internet. But on the other hand, once you start, you know, you mentioned negotiations, or Peter mentioned negotiations. Once you sort of distribute this all over the world, won't it take an enormous effort and a lot of compromise just to get the smallest things done? On the one hand, will that happen? And on the other hand, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Matthew, what do you think?
Well, you could certainly see that happening. Anyone who's followed any kind of discussion at the UN level, you know, I feel sorry for you because it goes on, and when you have so many countries with so many conflicting agendas, you know, if it was them talking about what we do with the internet, you'd have countries that wanted to give control to governments. You'd have countries that wanted to do all sorts of terrible things. I just don't see how, the alternative to say, well, let's just keep letting the U.S. run it, or letting ICANN work the way it is. There are a lot of flaws with ICANN the way it is, I think you could argue, and that's not saying that the EU is right about everything, but so how do you fix that problem?
The European Union is calling for this change, but how do they go about compelling the United States or compelling ICANN to give up control? I mean, what is the mechanism there? Is it just purely negotiation?
Yeah, to my knowledge, they don't have any way of forcing the U.S. to do anything, at least as far as I can tell. It has to be.
Right. So this is kind of a conversation then, right? I mean, this is. I was trying to figure out how they would. I was going to ask you guys because I don't understand how you would compel the U.S. to give up this power. I mean, I don't know what you would offer them in return, and maybe there's a fig leaf where the U.S. thinks, all right, if this will mollify some of the blowback we've been getting from the NSA, we offer up a little bit of this, not in any meaningful way. But again, that's a story. It's a story where it's as reported so far, as explained to someone like me so far. I'm missing the part where we get to action. So if this is just a conversation, it's just a conversation.
I don't understand what the advantage is for the U.S. government in having this ICANN be a United States-based organization. I mean, what is the practical advantage? It doesn't seem to really, certainly doesn't seem to matter to the NSA. Is there any advantage?
I think you just want to accumulate power because you want to accumulate power, right? I mean, it's just sort of a natural bureaucratic inclination. So you don't give anything up until you have to. I think that's a line right out of the Matrix. What was it? What do men with power want? More power. Well, more power to them. We're going to hear about the possibility that Microsoft may allow Android apps to run on Windows. But first, I want to tell you about Squarespace, which is my favorite and the #1 site for building beautiful websites on the internet. Now, Squarespace, you may have seen them make an appearance on the Super Bowl in their ad. It's called A Better Web Awaits. That's the name of their ad. And this is a fantastic ad that shows how annoying and obnoxious the internet is in general, how filled with spam and cheesy content the internet is in general. And their point is that by building a Squarespace site, you can do the opposite of that. You can create a website that's beautiful and elegant, easy to use, enjoyable to visit, and that will set your site apart from the rest of the internet. It's a really great ad, and I saw it actually online before the Super Bowl, and I thought, wow, that's really a great message that nobody else is delivering out there. Squarespace is fantastic because they have 25 beautiful templates for you to start with. You go in there and you choose a template, and then you can customize it so that the website that you end up with is unique on the internet. But no matter how unique it is, no matter how unusual your site is, you still use these beautiful, easy-to-use tools for adding photographs, for tweaking the design. And it's just a fantastic site. I've used it, and in fact, my whole family uses it. My wife uses it. My son uses it. Super easy to go there and just build a website in a few minutes, and it'll blow you away to see how great it is. They've also added something really great. It's called a logo creator tool. And if you're a small business or an individual, you're starting a small company, maybe you have some content creation that you're doing, and you want to create a logo, you don't have to be a designer to create a compelling logo. The Squarespace logo creator tool will help you go in there and sort of guide you through it. And if you want to see how this works, there's a demo video at blog.squarespace.com, and you should go check that out. Logos are expensive to have created, and sometimes they're difficult because it requires a lot of communication between the designer and yourself. You can do it yourself on Squarespace using their new logo creator tool. There's a completely redesigned customer help site on Squarespace, and their tech support is open 24/7, so they're always there to help you, and a real human being will always help you with Squarespace tech support. Now, e-commerce is now available for all subscription plans. So if you have something to sell, Squarespace is the place to sell it, and you can create your website and then just take money over the internet and run your business directly from the website. It starts at only $8 a month and includes a free domain name if you sign up for a year. And of course, Squarespace is mobile ready. Their Squarespace metric app for iPhone and iPad lets you check site stats and other metrics to manage your site
from a mobile device. And of course, Squarespace pages look fantastic on mobile devices. They're reorganized depending on what the device is, which is really, really cool. So start a free 2-week trial with no credit card required and start building your website today. When you sign up for Squarespace, make sure you use the offer code TNT2, which will get you 10% off, and also to show your support for Tech News Today. And we thank Squarespace for their support of Tech News Today. And remember that a better website awaits, and it starts with your new Squarespace website. Well, Verge's Tom Warren reports this morning that his sources say Microsoft may allow Android apps to run on Windows and Windows Phone. To explain all this is Tom Warren, a senior reporter at The Verge. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, how are you?
Well, okay, so we'll deal in a minute whether or not they're really going to do this or whether they're just talking about it. But would this save or kill Windows Phone? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it's going to really depend on the developers, right? In a way, it would allow app developers to easily port their apps across to Windows and not have to do the complex job of creating a whole new app. A lot of the things that we hear from developers is just they literally just don't have the money or the team size to create these apps. They're interested in Windows, they're interested in Windows Phone, but it's just a matter of resources. So I think that would kind of like bridge the gap. It really depends on if Microsoft does do this. It really depends how they do it. Their execution over the years hasn't been the greatest, so it would really depend how they'd actually enable developers to get these Android apps into the store and running, and whether they'd be smooth, what sort of experience it'd be. Because the current situation, the apps that allow this already, they're a little bit messy, a little bit clunky, and it's not really a smooth experience that you kind of expect from like a native app, for example.
It sounds to me like similar to the strategy taken by BlackBerry. How's it working for BlackBerry?
Yeah, well, I think we all know how it's working for BlackBerry. It's not really sold devices, put it that way. I guess it's easy and it's probably fair to compare it to the BlackBerry strategy, but also at the same time, Microsoft isn't just a phone company. They aren't just selling predominantly to certain markets and to the enterprise and stuff. They have a lot of other businesses, billion-dollar businesses that would sort of like pick up the slack of anything that they do in mobile. And obviously we've seen that over the past few years because Windows Phone, all right, it's growing in the past year, but they've been trying to grow it for years since the iPhone really kind of tossed everything up in the air. So yeah, I mean, it hasn't worked really well for BlackBerry, but I'd like to think that Microsoft probably have a better momentum or interest from developers than perhaps BlackBerry did when they sort of initially started doing this.
I understand the logic of doing this on Windows Phone because it's a mobile operating system that is. You could make the case that one of the reasons it hasn't been as popular and successful as it could have been is because it doesn't have the apps. So that makes sense. But why would they do this for Windows itself?
Well, I mean, I guess Windows is in the same situation. So Windows 8, they've kind of tried to force this Metro interface onto the traditional PCs, excuse me, onto tablets and just onto anything that they're putting like full fat Windows on. The thing is, it hasn't really resonated with users who are used to using mouse and keyboards and stuff. I think what we're going to see over the next year and possibly 2 years is Microsoft sort of step back from that a little bit, and they're obviously going to still do that sort of tablet interface on the tablet side and the touch side. But I think what we're going to start doing is taking these apps back out onto the desktop, and then at that point you really need the apps. And Windows 8 is in a worse place than Windows Phone right now in terms of apps. Windows Phone is starting to get a little bit more momentum, like people are at least building for it. The apps might not be quite as good as they are on iOS and Android, but they're starting to get people interested in actually developing. But Windows 8, on the other hand, the store is still pretty barren, really, to be honest. And it's been just over a year, so it's still early days, so it's still hard to tell. But from people that I talked to, several developers, even people like Trello, they've made a Windows 8 app. They've done the investment, and then they just haven't seen a return yet. So it kind of puts people off. So Android could be a way to bridge that. But on the Windows side, the Android doesn't necessarily have very many tablet full screen optimized apps. So it could be another challenge there.
So just to confirm, this is just a conversation within Microsoft, right? These are not actual plans.
Yeah, I mean, it's early planning towards sort of Windows 9 and stuff next year, but they are holding discussions with third parties. We don't know exactly who, but you can probably guess at the sorts of folks that they'd be talking to. It's only really Intel and BlueStacks that have really been heavily involved on getting Android on Windows. So, I mean, it's probably safe to assume that they've been talking to those guys. I mean, we can't say they definitely have, but it's super early days. I don't know whether they'll go one way or the other, but it's definitely a serious consideration.
Well, Tom, thank you for explaining all this, and you can find Tom's story at The Verge. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
You can also find Tom at Tom Warren on Twitter. Well, the use of smartphones in the workplace is still growing fast. Today, there are 132 million people who use their smartphones at work, and that's expected to grow to 328 million workers by 2017, according to a report from the mobile security solutions provider Good Technology. Joining us to talk about smartphones at work is Ina Fried, a senior editor at Recode. Welcome, Ina.
Hey, Mike.
The iPhone accounts for about 73% of all enterprise mobile device activations, I understand, according to the report. Why is the most consumery of devices dominating the enterprise?
I think that Apple has actually been able to make the case to enterprises that it's a more secure option than Android. And although there's a lot more security software for Android, Android is a lot more wide open. I think the notion of Apple being very buttoned down, of the long testing process for apps, of the limited ability to get in there and tweak, I think has won a lot of attention from enterprises. And the other thing is just the fact that the C-level executives that make these decisions are the ones who wanted to bring their iPhones to work. So a lot of iPhones came into the office initially because the CEO, the CFO, whoever said, I want to use the iPhone and make it work. And that has expanded to overall iPhone support for employees, and now even to deployment of workplace apps for the iPhone. So it's a rather unusual way of getting into the enterprise, but it certainly seems to have worked for Apple so far.
Do you think that the bring your own device policy is now the default in U.S. enterprises? I mean, we've seen this coming for a long time, and I'm not sure we've reached the 50% point, but do you think there's going to be a critical point when that's just the default policy?
I think it seems to be. I mean, what basically happened was you went from this period, as we all know, where there was limited use of mobile in the enterprise, but it was basically the company would decide we want to support whether it was corporate email or some other function. Typically, it was BlackBerry or Windows Phone, going way back, even Palm Pilots. And that era lasted basically until the iPhone took hold. And there's not any clear indication that that's going to reverse itself. I think we will see IT look to reassert itself in terms of policies, but I think those policies are going to be sort of backwards strapped onto the devices that are already brought into the enterprise.
One of the interesting things from this report is that it kind of details the shifting usage models for using smartphones in a workplace. Used to be, for years and years, people would tend to say, well, you can't do real work on a phone. But in fact, people are doing real work. Turns out that document editing is still the most popular business task on smartphones. But increasingly, people are using cloud storage and business intelligence apps. The custom enterprise app development grew 55% in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's almost to the point where smartphones are replacing PCs for some people, or at least that's how it looks to me. What do you think?
I don't think they're replacing PCs, but I think they are definitely augmenting them in a big way. And I think what you are starting to see is businesses figure out, what can we really do with these devices? What can we do better with these devices? For a long time, it was sort of, how can we sort of use this tiny screen to do what we used to do on a PC? And that's really the wrong way to approach it. I think what companies are now saying is, okay, everyone's got this smartphone all the time. How do we use it to be more productive? And I think, the most successful companies are going to be the ones that really look and say, let's not try and cram, Excel spreadsheets onto these things. Let's figure out how can we give our workers access to the information from the cloud that they need, and how can we let them enter information in a much easier way? And I think, a couple of years from now, we'll be talking about the companies that are able to do that. And certainly a lot of that is going to have to be custom apps because each business is really different. For me, it's how can I do a little tiny bit of content editing from my phone, or how can I make sure those photos that I take on my phone easily get onto our website? For you guys, it might be a way of podcasting from the phone. I think every company is going to have slightly different needs, but companies that ignore the idea that we all have these phones are probably going to be doing so at their peril.
Well, thank you for joining us to explain all this. It's really an interesting trend.
Thank you.
You can find Ina Fried at Ina Fried on Twitter and also recode.net. Well, Microsoft was accused of censoring global Bing searches on behalf of the Chinese government. But Microsoft has said it was just a glitch. According to the Chinese freedom of speech group greatfire.org and confirmed by Reuters, searches conducted globally in Chinese showed different results than the same searches in English. It's a weird glitch, Matthew. What do you think? Did Microsoft, were they really censoring these results internationally? Do you buy their explanation?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I find it hard to believe that they were doing that. I honestly find it hard to believe that they were deliberately censoring searches from outside China. I mean, to do that would just cause a huge amount of, controversy and attention that they don't really need. So it feels to me more like something happened that they weren't expecting, or maybe there was a setting or cookies or something like that. But it doesn't feel, I just can't imagine them doing that. So
it does highlight the fact that Microsoft does in fact censor searches within China. And it's a point of controversy, especially since Google basically left China because in part it didn't want to continue censoring for the Chinese Communist Party, essentially. And it's a kind of a funny footnote in all this is that Microsoft posted their reply inside China. It was immediately censored by the Chinese government, which wanted to remove the references to the Freedom of Speech Organization. Kind of a funny thing. So, Peter, is this something that will continue? I mean, why do people accept the idea of big Western technology companies censoring the internet? I mean, search engine companies are supposed to be in the business of making all information available to everybody. Is there just too much money to be made in China?
Yeah, they're not in the business of making information available to everybody, right? They're in the business of making money, and to make money in China, you need to play with the Chinese government, and you can either play or not play, right? And you pointed out the Google example; they didn't want to. They tried to play to a certain degree with China, and then eventually said, "This isn't worth it. We're done." Microsoft is making a different bet. Facebook is trying to get their head around it as well. And again, the reason to believe Microsoft's semi-apology, semi-explanation for what they did is, if they were doing this, the reason they would censor something outside the country is to appease the Chinese government as well. It would be stupid, but that's why they would be doing it. So if they were doing it, they would say, yes, that's what we're doing, and we're doing it to make good with our new friends and partners in China. So their explanation that it's a screw up makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I'm sure it is an error. It's a weird position that companies are in. They essentially have to decide where the line is. I mean, there are all kinds of things various governments want companies to do, and it's impossible to have a single policy worldwide. China has wanted various companies to go after and turn over information about, human rights activists and their personal details, and there's always going to be a line there to be drawn, and the companies are pretty much on their own. There aren't any legal requirements. There are no international guidelines that I'm aware of that are widely accepted. So it's just kind of a weird thing that companies have to do to figure out how much they want to cooperate. Looks like Peter's Skype connection froze there.
Mike, I was going to say this kind of thing is a lot harder for companies like, say, Twitter, that effectively has based a lot of its appeal on being what they call the free speech wing of the free speech party. They have to tread very carefully when it comes to governments like Turkey or Syria or Egypt or whatever. I think Microsoft and Google, in a way, they can fall back on the argument that search is just, it's some results that we choose to show you. It's not sort of free speech in that sense. Although arguably it should abide by the same rules.
One other strange footnote, just so that people understand how this kind of censorship takes place within China. When you search for, say, the Dalai Lama, one of the results you'll get globally is a link to the Wikipedia. Within China, you'll get, instead of that, you'll get a link to the Chinese version of Wikipedia that is heavily censored by the government. So search results look superficially oftentimes very similar, but in reality, there's the hand of censorship taking place there. Well, Google said today that its acquisition of Nest is a done deal. Nest is a startup, of course, that makes smart thermostats and smart smoke detectors. Peter, why do you think Google bought Nest, and why was it worth $3.2 billion?
$3.2 billion sounds like a lot of money to any regular person. To Google, it's not very much. I remember they just spent much more on that on Motorola, ended up deciding they didn't want that company after all. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the past buying a single person. For instance, Max Levchin, when they bought his slide company, they spent several $100 million basically acquiring Max, and he was gone within a year. And really what they're doing here is they're buying talent. They're also buying a products company, and those two are connected. But really what you're doing is buying, I think 100 folks, one of whom at one point was tapped. A lot of folks thought might run Apple one day. And that's at their core. They're saying, we want a bunch of guys who are really smart about building consumer products, and we're going to put them to work for us.
You know, it seems like the Nest acquisition is about thermostats and smoke detectors, but various people have different theories about what it's all about. Neil Doshi of CRT Capital thinks it's about home entertainment, of all things. iRobot CEO Colin Angle thinks that the acquisition is about robots working with home sensors, and they imagine, some of Google's robots going around the house and helping to care for people and do the dishes and all that kind of stuff, in concert with home sensors. DeepMind, of course, is an acquisition that Google made recently, and that acquisition was about artificial intelligence that learns. And of course, the Nest system is also another thing that where the system is learning theoretically. It sounds like Google really wants to get into the business where, with sensors and learning, where the system is always learning. If you look at Google Now, for example, that's another Google offering, Matthew, that is supposed to adapt and adjust based on your behavior and what it senses from you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that that's what Google's up to. I mean, almost everything they buy seems to be devoted to some form of sort of AI, deep learning, whatever you want to call it. Their game is to, and Google Now is a great example, their game is to accumulate as much information about you and your activity and your behavior and your desires as possible, so that then they can show you relevant information. And in fact, Eric Schmidt has talked about getting beyond, and Larry and Sergey have talked about getting beyond search to the point where they just show you things without you even having to search for them, because they already know what you're interested in. So, I've seen lots of jokes about Google buying the maker of Big Dog robots and Nest thermostats and DeepMind. And so now we'll have smart dog-shaped robots with guns that can sense temperature. But I don't think they really, I don't think that's what they're up to. All of those things are designed to get smart people to come up with ways of thinking about how all these different sources of information act together and what it can tell them about you.
And of course, one of the things that came with the Nest acquisition was Tony Fadell, who is considered one of the primary creators of the iPod when he was at Apple. And he's super into home sensor networks and believes in a future where your home is filled with all kinds of sensors. And so that was a good catch by Google.
I think one other aspect which you sort of touched on is Google is great at accumulating information. It often sucks at developing really sexy Apple-style products. I think that's a big focus for them, this team, their ability to take something like a thermostat, something totally normal, redesign it, make it user-friendly, make it nice to use. That's something Google doesn't have a whole lot of bench strength in that area.
They're good at making cheap hardware, though, and the Nest smoke detectors are currently, I believe, if I recall, about $250 each. So if you want 4 of them, that's $1,000 for smoke detectors. So hopefully, in addition to everything else and all the artificial intelligence and learning and sensors, they'll lower the price of those smoke detectors, because they're pretty cool, really. They're just a little on the pricey side. Well, Twitter is testing a redesign that makes Twitter look a little bit more like Google Plus or maybe Facebook. The new look focuses on pictures and a Google-like cards interface. And it isn't the usual vertical stream. It has sort of little cards all over the page. Peter, isn't the simple minimalist stream what people like most about Twitter?
Yeah, we should caution that, one, this is a test and Google Twitter test stuff. Two, from what I can tell, this is the Mashable piece, the only place I've seen it, they're showing you what looks like a sort of a user page instead of sort of a main timeline stream. Without seeing it myself, it's hard to sort of tell. So we needed to figure out whether this is the way they're talking about displaying all of your content or just sort of your homepage. If it's your homepage, it's much less or if it's your sort of profile page, it's much less consequential. But Twitter's at a point now, and it's quite clear based on the last earnings call, where they need to try lots of different stuff to get you to stick around the site more, whether you're a new user who's trying to figure it out or whether you're someone who's experienced at it, who their sort of engagement metrics are down as well. So there's lots of signs they're trying lots of different stuff. I'm getting all sorts of prompts and queries from them to click on different things. If you get a direct message notification now, you used to get it in your email, it would say what the message was, and they've got to click in to Twitter to use it. So I throw this in the category of tossing a lot of stuff against the wall, seeing if any of it works, and they're at the point where they need to try that.
Well, in other news, Snapchat users are being spammed with pictures of smoothies, of all things. It's caused by a new spam outbreak that redirects people who receive messages to an allrecipes.com page for very delicious smoothies. The messages appear to come from actual Snapchat friends, and Snapchat is trying to put a lid on it. Well, that's our show today. I'd like to thank Matthew Ingram and Peter Kafka for joining us today, and you can find Matthew on Twitter at MatthewI. Thanks again, Matthew.
Thanks for having me.
And you can find Peter at pkafka on Twitter. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
So make sure you send your news tips to our email address at tnt@twit.tv or call 260-TNT-SHOW and leave a message. Also, post and upvote your favorite stories on our subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com and find the rest of our social pages by searching for Tech News Today on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Tech News Today at twit.tv/TNT. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Mike Elgin. I'll see you tomorrow. What do they call this? The infinite, like, recursive? I can see the end of infinity.